that were carried down from the times of Pan, 24,000 years BK, before Cosmos. And being that they were excluded from the rest of the world, their religions were never interrupted by outsiders or foreign invaders. And now, in the Lord's fifth book, chapter 5, verse 14, it states, "The tribes that were that the tribes that went in the two ships to the Northland, Japan, no man could draw the line for after thousands of years between them. And the Ions, or the Ahuans, the copper-colored people, for they mingled therewith and were lost as Ions. Nevertheless, they redeemed the barbarians into wisdom and peace." And here, being that Japan was separated from the other sons of Noah, the Japanese were unknown to the other sons of Noah until thousands of years after the flood. And it states that the Ions, the sacred little people, are older than the Ahuans, the copper-colored people. Now we're going to move into the fleets, or the sons of Japhet. Now in the Lord's first book, chapter 1, verse 58, it states, "The fleet named Japhet was driven to the westward and north, and the country was called Japhet for thousands of years thereafter, and is the same as is called China to this day." So Japhet is Asia and China, that region. And in the Lord's fifth book, chapter 3, verse 9, it states, "For I locked up a sufficient of the Panic language in Japhet as a testimony to be discovered in after years, showing that unlike Ham and Shem, a mighty nation could retain one language for thousands of years." So here it states that a great portion of the Panic language was retained by the Chinese after the flood, even until this day. That's why when you look at the Chinese alphabet and words, it is unlike any other language and alphabet, because it stems from the ancient Panic language. Now the Lord's fifth book, chapter 5, verse 4, 9, and 10, it states, "For those that came to Japhet survived 21,000 years and then became extinct as to tribes." So now the fleets of Japhet were 34 ships that landed off the coast of China. And in the fleets of Japhet, there were 3,105 people in that fleet. And they survived 21,000 years and became extinct as the tribes. And 21,000 years is 7 arc cycles of 3,000 years, which is from the 17th arc cycle, the Ark of Noah at the time of the flood, to the 24th arc cycle, the Ark of Bond. Now, verse 9, it states, "Those of Japhet attained 2,000 large cities and 7,000 small ones, being more than 8 million souls, and they retained the name Japhah to the last. But the Ahuans called them Tugit, signifying people of spirit light." Verse 10, "And there came a Jah on the earth, and it touched them with impotency, and they brought forth no more hairs, so the Lord took them home." So here it states that the fleets of Japhet had large cities and nations, and the Ahuans, the copper-colored people of the fleets of Japhet, called the Ions, the sacred little people of the fleets of Japhet, Tugit, signifying people of spirit light. And the Ions ascended to the high heavens 21,000 years after the flood, which would have been the time of Moses in the Exodus. Now we're going to move into the fleets of Shem. The Lord's first book, chapter 1, verse 59, it states, "The fleet named Shem landed to the south, and the country was called Shem for thousands of years afterward, and is the same as is called India to this day." So the boundaries of Shem is India, and it extended far and wider than what you see today as India, including the so-called Middle East, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Persia, included Shem. And in the Lord's fifth book, chapter 5, verse 5, 11, and 12, it states, verse 5. Those that came to Shem survived 12,000 years and then became extinct by amalgamation. So now the fleets of Shem had 34 ships that landed off the coast of India. And in the fleets of Shem, there were 3,105 people in that fleet. And they survived 12,000 years and became extinct as the tribes carrying that name. Verse 11. Those of Shem attained to 600 large cities and 2,000 small cities, being more than 2 million souls. Neither had they any king, but served the Lord through the city's father. And they retained the name Shem to the last. But the Ahuans, the copper-colored people, called the Ayans Shravidi Ayah, signifying people of the true light, woman light. And impotence came upon them, and they disappeared even as a drop of water in the sunlight, and no man knew when they ceased to be. Verse 12. But hoping to preserve their seed to the Lord, many of them married with the Ahuans, the copper-colored people. But their children became Ahuans also, neither having the silk hair nor musical voice of the Ayans, nor the light of the upper heavens. So here it states, the fleets of Shem had large cities and nations, and the Ahuans, the copper-colored people of the fleets of Shem, called the Ayans, the sacred little people of the fleets of Shem, Shravidi Ayah, signifying people of true light, and the Ayans ascended to the high heavens 21,000 years after the flood. Now we're going to move into the fleets or the sons of Ham. The Lord's first book, chapter 1, verse 60 states, For the fleet named Ham landed southwest, and the country was called the land of Ham for thousands of years, and is the same as is called Egypt in Africa to this day. So the name of Ham is called Africa and Egypt. Now, in the Lord's fifth book, chapter 3, verse 3 through 5, and verses 12 through 13, it states, I'm going to just run it down. Verse 3. To Ham I alluded the foundation of the migratory tribes of the earth. And of the tribes of Ham, behold, I selected many colors of men, whereof I foreordained the name Ham to stand as a living testimony to the end of the world. For I foresaw that the time would come when the nations would look back for histories of my peoples, and I erected certain words and signs which should be testimony in the later times of the earth. So here it states that the fleets of Ham were the foundation of the migratory tribes of the earth. And this is where you get the Hamites or the Kemites, the Africans, being present in all countries because Jehovah alluded to them the foundation of migratory. Verse 4. Of all colors, black, white, yellow, copper, red, and brown were the tribes of Ham. Nevertheless, they were Ayans, fakers, having flat nails and short arms, and of such as desired to acquire knowledge. And I brought them to a country of sands and fields of rich pastures interspread, where lived but few native, the dark people, with short hair. Neither omitted I even the hair of the head of man without providing testimony of my word. So here it states that within the fleets of Ham, you had many colors and tribes of people. You had black, brown, copper, yellow, white, and they interspread abroad the lands now called Ham or Cam. And remember that these are families of different tribes making up the fleets of Ham, not to be confused with the concept of Ham being a man and these being his offspring. That's not the case. And the same thing applies for Shem, Japhet, Gautama, and Yester. Verse 5. Of the Ayans I provided testimony in all another division of the earth with long hair belonging to the tribes that worship Jehovah.